we go. Record. Now I'm recording. So I'm going to record this and I'll stick it up onto YouTube and give you guys the link as well. So yeah, handing over to Karl.
Cool. Okay, guys. So thanks for coming and joining us. Just so you know, I can't see any of you because the setup I've got for the camera is basically I can see Nathan and no one else. So if anyone has anything, like flag it to him and he'll pass it on to me, and then we'll kind of crack on from there. Oh, he's disappeared as well now. That's great. So first thing, we're going to go through shoulder rehab today. And I want to just give you things that you can actually use at home. So not things that you're going to require equipment for, or you're going to need to go to a gym for, or anything like that. So everything we're going to do today is going to be no equipment. You're literally going to need a bit of floor space, or if we get to it towards the end, you might need like a work surface, and I'm just going to use the front desk of the gym for that. First thing, for any of because we might do a few rehab videos over the next month or so. When it comes to rehab, there's kind of two areas, and that's traumatic injury rehab or chronic injury rehab. So traumatic injury rehab would be, you get mauled really hard by someone and something in your shoulder pops, or you throw a big right hook and you dislocate your arm or something crazy like that. So that's a traumatic injury, an acute traumatic injury. Chronic injuries are more things that just arise over time due to the postures or the shapes and the things you have to do for your sport. So the really common one is kind of shoulder pain in boxers from being in a boxing stance for too long. If you do a lot of jiu-jitsu, like I spend most of my time sort of sat in this butterfly guard position, which isn't great posture for several parts of my body. So you're going to kind of come up with these chronic injuries over time. And it's not that you're doing anything wrong. You're actually doing your sport correctly. But it might be that doing your sport correctly isn't necessarily the best thing for your body, especially if you do it a lot. So that's mostly what we're going to focus on, the chronic injury rehab. If you have a traumatic injury, like you do pick up an actual real injury, that's kind of going down the medical route. So I'm not going to touch that today. So we're going to be talking about chronic injuries and just what you can do to offset that. There is a term that gets thrown around a lot as well, prehab, which is kind of preventative rehab. A lot of what we're going to do on today's session is going to fall under that category. So it's stuff that you can throw in during warm-ups, or that you can do before a session, or you can just kind of pepper it out throughout the day. But it's to try and offset the sort of negative effects of doing your sport. And like I said, even if you're doing it correctly for the sport, it might not be great for your body. So we're going to try and offset that as much as we can. So first thing, shoulder. I'm not going to talk too much about anatomy today. We're going to go real functional with it. So I'm only going to talk about things that are actually going to be useful to you information-wise. There's two areas that we kind of want to think about with chronic shoulder injuries, and that's the internal external rotation issue and the shoulder blade protraction retraction issue. So internal rotation and external rotation. Basically, internal rotation is if the easy way to do it, if you just kind of sat at home, is if you turn the back of your hand to face you, whichever way your thumb is pointing, if you rotate your shoulder in that direction, that will be internal rotation, okay? And the same idea, if I turn my palm towards me, whichever way my thumb is facing, if I follow that, that would be external rotation. Most sports, and particularly our sports, striking and grappling sports, involve a lot of internal rotation. So punches, your thumb would be turning inwards as you throw a punch, so that's going to be internal rotation. A lot of grappling is pulling your hands in towards your center line. This is all internal rotation. So we spend a lot of time doing that in our sports. What we don't spend a lot of time doing is externally rotating. So the muscles responsible for that will often spend a lot of time under a lot of stretch. So they're being stretched because our internal rotators are working, and they don't get a lot of kind of like extra work. So it's very rare that you do anything that involves a lot of external rotation. The second problem we have is protraction versus retraction. And all that is my shoulder blade or my shoulder girdle. Protraction would be going forwards, retraction would be squeezing backwards, okay? So protraction happens, again, a huge amount in our sport. Again, if you play like butterfly guard, if you're grappling, your arms are going to be in front of you a lot, so you're going to be in a lot of protraction. If you're boxing, like a boxing stance, it's protraction because you're trying to keep your hands in front of you. You don't spend a lot of time retracting and squeezing your shoulder blades back and together. So again, all the muscles that are back there, things like your rhomboids and your traps, don't get a lot of work, but everything at the front, like your pecs, your pec minor, they get a lot of work and they get very short and very tight. So that can lead to problems. So the exercises we're going to cover are going to try and work against that. So we're going to try and get some external rotation working, and we're going to try and get some scapular retraction working. Okay, so retraction, the easy way to think about it is if you imagine you put a pencil between your shoulder blades and you try and pinch it and hold it in place, that would be retraction. So because we kind of want to make this as efficient as possible, we're going to try and use exercises that do both at the same time. So we want external rotation and retraction at the same time if we can get it. You can isolate those things, but you tend to need equipment for that. So if you wanted to isolate external rotation, you need things like bands. I have like quite a big collection of bands, but if you don't, then that information is kind of useless to you. So we're going to stick to things that we can do with no equipment today. So first thing I'm going to look at is something really, really basic exercise. Most of you will have seen me doing this warming up at the gym, and it's known as a floor slide. So floor slide. So that's when I'm kind of face down and it looks like I'm sort of waving my arms around. It looks like I'm trying to swim on the floor. So I'm going to show you it. I'm going to try and give you a couple of different angles. It's going to be a bit weird with the camera. And then I'll kind of talk through what I'm doing, and then I'll just show you it again at the end, okay? So a basic floor slide will look like this. Okay. So hopefully you got a good shot of that. I can't see where my face is to the floor. So what I'm doing is I'm laying flat on my front. I'm putting myself in this kind of W position. So I'm making a W with my arms. And then I'm just reaching overhead. There's a couple of things that I'm trying to do when I do this. First of all, I'm trying to stay in that retracted position. So I'm trying to pinch my shoulder blades together the whole time. The second thing is when I reach up above my head, I'm trying to not shrug my shoulders. So I'm trying to keep my shoulders down when I reach. So I'm trying to avoid going into this shrugged overhead position. So I'm trying to find that retraction and that overhead reach. Okay. Now, the W position that I was in puts me into external rotation straight away. So being in this position is already in external rotation. Okay, so that's the floor slide. Is a really simple, basic, easy way to start. I'll show you it again in a second with a different angle. But this is a really easy place to begin with things like a warm-up exercise or something that you could do kind of every single day. This is really, really undervalued, especially for strikers, because you spend so much time in this protracted position. And this is kind of one of the easiest, most accessible things you can do. And like you can see, you just need a bit of floor for it, okay? When it comes to sets and reps for this sort of thing, it's not that we want to try and get lots and lots of reps in. What we want is a lot of time under tension, okay? So time under tension is a phrase used in like bodybuilding a lot, but it basically just means the amount of time the muscle is being contracted for. So because we spend a lot of time contracting the muscles in the front of our shoulders and those internal rotators, we need to try and kind of even that up by getting a lot of time with our posterior muscles. So everything that's kind of on the back of my shoulder and between the shoulder blades, we want to try and get lots of time under a contracted state for those. So the best way to do this is, if you can, is to set a timer and to start off with sets of, most people can manage sets of 15 seconds. It doesn't matter how many reps you do in those 15 seconds, but we're just aiming for total time. And you want to try and work up to sets of almost up to a minute. 45 seconds to 60 seconds would be great. And you want multiple sets, so sort of 2 to 3 sets when you do this. If you're just doing this in a warm-up in the gym, you can just kind of knock a couple of reps out before you get on the mats, or sorry, once you're on the mats. But if you're trying to do this to improve your shoulder health, you want to try and build up that time under tension, okay? So just once more, I'm going to be in that W shape, and I'm reaching overhead without letting my shoulders raise up too much, and I'm trying to pinch my shoulder blades when I do it. So that's a nice simple place to start, and no equipment needed. Most people will be able to manage that unless you have any kind of pre-existing shoulder issues. Going one step up above that, we want to try and get through a little bit more range of motion at that shoulder joint. So what we're going to use is something called a controlled articular rotation. And that's just a big fancy kind of name for taking my shoulder through a full range of motion. That's all it means, okay? So as a ball and socket joint has a very wide range of motion. One of the downsides to ball and socket joints is they're not very stable. So we need to try and take it through its full range of motion under load so that we can stabilize all of those positions. So what I'm essentially going to do is the same as that floor slide position. I'm going to be face down, but I'm going to go from a position of having my hand behind my head. My arm is going to straighten out. I'm going to take it down to shoulder level. And then really importantly, I'm going to rotate my thumb as far into internal rotation as possible. And then I'm going to try and take the back of my hand to my lower back. I'm then going to reverse that whole motion. So it will be, I extend at the elbow. I come up to shoulder level. I turn the thumb as far outwards as possible, going into that external rotation position. And then I reach the hand to the back of the head again, okay? So I'm going through that full rotational kind of spectrum, and I'm separating the motions out just to make it so that I can kind of focus on getting that full external or full internal rotation. Now, we already said that we've done too much internal rotation. We wanted more external rotation, but because I'm going to do this face down, this is going to be loading my posterior shoulder muscles. And those are all the muscles that are responsible for the external rotation. So while I will go into an internal rotation doing this, it's still the external rotators that are working hard, okay? So hand behind the head, straighten the elbow, shoulder level, thumb all the way through, back of the hand to lower back, and then I just reverse that motion, straighten the arm, up to shoulder level, all the way into that external rotation, hand will go behind the head. Okay, I'm going to do it with both arms, and again, I'm going to do it face down. I'm just going to do one full rep. You see, it takes quite a while to get all the way through a single rep. So I'm going to start with the hands behind the head. See, my thumbs are up. I extend my elbows, come down to shoulder level. I go all the way through into internal rotation, and then I reach my hands to my lower back. And then I'm going to reverse that motion, so I extend my arms up to shoulder level, all the way into external rotation, so thumbs are up, and then my hands find the back of my head again. Okay? So again with that, we're aiming for time under tension, but that's a much more challenging exercise. For some of you, especially if you've spent a lot of time kind of in internal rotation, getting the hand to the lower back might be quite uncomfortable. So don't try and kind of force it there to start with. The hand getting to the hip is just fine. It doesn't have to go behind the back. That's absolutely fine. Just work with the range of motion that you have to force anything. But again, we go for time under tension with that. So slow, steady reps. It doesn't matter how many reps you do, but we're looking at total time. Okay. So with anything like kind of chronic injuries, it's very often an underused muscle group paired against a very overused muscle group. And the best way to even that up isn't to use the overused muscle group less, because you can't start boxing with your hands out wide because you don't want to be in internal rotation. You're going to get punched in the face. So the better thing to do is to get lots and lots of extra time under tension for the underused muscle group. So again, it's that time under tension that we're really focusing on here, okay? If anyone's got any questions, just flag them up. I'm just going to go through the cameras to see who's still watching. Okay, guys, so...
Yeah, they're all still here, Karl. This is great so far. Obviously, I use bands a lot, and I do a lot of this stuff almost every day because I tore a rotator cuff because I wasn't doing this stuff. And I don't know if you remember, I couldn't lift my right arm above my shoulder for about a year. So until I got some steroids in it. So yeah, I highly recommend everyone, if you're doing some striking, to get stuck into this stuff. I keep thinking about asking you some questions, and then you answer them immediately. So I'll let you get on with it.
Cool, that's the aim. I'm trying to just beat everything first. I've just seen a question that's popped up. It's relevant to what we were just doing. So Jane just asked, is there any reason we have to do this on the floor rather than standing? And the reason that Jane's asking that is because I've showed her this exact same exercise sequence before against a wall, and it would have been called a wall slide because I like really fancy names. So the floor slide has a much more heavy bias for your external rotation muscles, okay? So all it means is gravity is working directly against my arm, pulling it into the floor. So I'm having to fight that external rotation a lot more. If I was to do this stood up against a wall, there would be a little less pull into that internal rotation. So my external rotators wouldn't have to work anywhere near as hard. But what I would have to fight is the want to raise my shoulder up when my arms go above my head. Okay, so when we go into that overhead position, my shoulder will want to shrug. And when I'm doing it stood up, it will want to shrug even more because your trap's going to want to join in and try and help get your arm overhead as much as possible. So it's just a slightly different bias based on, we're just using gravity just to kind of select which muscles we want to focus on. So face down would be much more to do with our scapular retractors and our external rotation muscles. Against a wall, it's the same exercise. I follow all the same cues, but it's just focusing a lot more on switching off our upper trap and stopping us pulling ourselves into that overhead position. So it's just a slightly different emphasis on different muscle groups. I hope that answers that for you, Jane. So that's our kind of external rotation and sort of protraction, retraction areas sort of covered a little bit. There's a lot more exercises to cover there. We can talk about a lot more of them. Many of them are just variations on what we did there. So we had the floor slide and we had that controlled articular rotation. Okay, controlled articular rotation is just known as a Karl. So they're known as scapular Karls. There's a lot of different other things we can do. Like I said, it's just often breaking down those exercises into smaller groups. So if you go looking for sort of rotator cuff exercises on YouTube or on Google or anything like that, you'll often hear of an exercise series called a YTWI. So it's just the letters YTWI. And all that is the floor slide that we just did broken down into individual static holds. So just isometrics. So it'd be my Y shape, my T shape, my W, and my I. Okay. So it's just the same exercise we were just doing, that floor slide position with an extra hold added in as a T shape. And you just do those isometric holds. So again, it's going on that idea of time under tension. You just hold each position for a certain amount of time. If you've had any prior shoulder injuries, or you've got kind of cranky shoulders already, doing this kind of floor slide, so motion under load, can piss your shoulder joints off a little bit sometimes. So if you find that you do a set of floor slides and you think, man, my shoulders just aren't enjoying that very much, you might benefit more from isometric type holds, such as something like a YTWI. Okay, so you can go for that as well. If you throw that into YouTube, you'll find all those. They're often known as black burns as well. I don't know why. I'm guessing whoever came up with them got their name on there first. Okay, so that's kind of our muscular imbalance area that we discussed there. So sort of our rotator cuff and our posterior shoulder muscles not being up to scratch. There's another part to shoulder injuries that people don't talk about as much, and that's shoulder stability. Okay, so your shoulder, as most of you know, is a ball and socket joint. And when people hear ball and socket joint, they think that the socket is kind of quite deep, like a bowl almost. And that the head, the head of the humerus, so our ball, sits in there and can't really come out. That's not actually true. If you look at any anatomical charts, the socket part of the ball and socket is actually quite flat, and the ball kind of sits against it, and it's held in by like cartilage and muscular sort of tissue around the area. Okay, so it can actually move around quite a bit, and especially if you're doing something explosive like striking, so you're putting a lot of force through your shoulder joint, or if you're doing something where the shoulder's bearing a lot of weight in an unusual position. So for the grapplers, think an elbow push escape. So if I'm elbow pushing my way out of side control, this shoulder is having a lot of weight run through it at a slightly odd angle. So it's not a very stable position. Your shoulder stability becomes really, really important. This is part and parcel of your kind of building the muscles in this area by doing the exercises we just covered, because your rotator cuff muscles do something called concavity compression. It doesn't really matter what that is too much, it's just a big fancy name. And all it means is the muscles physically pull that ball and socket joint together so that it doesn't slide around when it's under load. That's all concavity compression means. So if you can build up your sort of posterior shoulder muscles in your external rotators, that will help. But also, we just want to get our shoulder into slightly odd positions under load and make sure that it's stable there. And then we can just progress those exercises and make them harder as we go. Someone just asked a question, I think it was Jacob, just asked a question about yoga. I'm literally about to steal a position from yoga and modify it a little bit. So when we talk about shoulder stability, most people here will have done push-ups or planks and things like that. And you feel like in this position, your shoulders feel quite stable and it's easy to hold for quite a long time. But when we start to leave that kind of position and our arm goes into different areas, that pressure through our shoulder changes, so your stability has to be better. And one of the best exercises for this is just the downward dog from yoga, which pretty much everybody knows. Now, I modify it a little bit because I'm not as flexible, so I do it with slightly bent knees. And I'm going to show you a progression as well where you go to one arm, but we're just going to run through this real quickly. So this is just working on our shoulder stability. And again, you could throw this into warm-ups. This could be something you do before class, after class. It doesn't really matter too much. Okay? It's not super intense, and all you need is your own body weight again. So I'm just going to go into kind of a bear crawl position and go into that downward dog shape sort of thing. So my hands are going to start not directly stacked underneath my shoulders. They're going to be slightly out in front. And I'm just going to take my knees off the mat. Now the goal is I'm going to back my butt up as far as I can and just reach overhead. And my goal is to kind of look at my toes. So I'm going to this kind of downward dog position. And when I'm doing this, I'm trying to get a nice flat back. I'm trying to get my arms almost behind the line of my ear. So I don't want to kind of get stuck here. I want to try and get them past the line of my ear if I can. If you've not got great shoulder mobility at the moment, that might be quite difficult for you, so don't force it. But that's an idea of just getting into an overhead position with load. And if you watch from the front, I'm trying to avoid, again, like we talked about with that floor slide, I'm trying to not go into that shrugged position really early. Going into that shrugged position is just my trap trying to join in and help out because my shoulder stabilizers aren't strong enough on their own. So we want to avoid that if we can. So if you see my shoulders start down away from my ears and they don't travel up to my ears when I go into this position. So my shoulders are staying away from my ears as much as possible. And again, you can do this for time, you can do this for reps. For shoulder stability, often it's just a kind of feel of getting into the position, spending a bit of time there and getting used to it. If you feel like that's easy or you feel like you've got good stable shoulders, or if you've just done quite a lot of physical exercise before and you've got no prior injury risk, you can just progress doing this to one hand. Now, whenever I do kind of one-handed exercises, you'll see me use my other hand and kind of hold my rib cage. And what I'm looking for is I'm trying to reduce rib flare. So all rib flare is my body just trying to kind of compensate for range of motion by extending my spine. So I'm trying to avoid that, and I just use my hand as like a physical cue. And if I feel my rib really flaring out, that means I've extended my spine. Okay, so that's all that hand reach is. So again, we can do that same position But I'm just going to go one-handed now, and again, the shoulder's going to stay away from the ear. I'm going into that overhead position. And obviously, this is much more challenging on my shoulder stabilizers. But that's kind of the goal. We're trying to challenge it in a safe position. So I'm not trying to get my shoulder yanked out of position or anything like that. I'm trying to challenge it in that overhead position and make sure that it's stabilized. There's a few other options you have with this. Anytime you do anything like a plank, it's a good idea, not on a class when you're already working hard and you're already tired, but if you're doing it in your warm-ups or you do it in your own training away from it, trying to progress to a one-armed plank. So a one-armed plank has a huge amount of benefits for a whole host of reasons. So regular planks, most people that are on the Zoom call right now can probably hold a plank for at least a minute, maybe longer. The world record for the plank is something insane like 11 hours now. If you really want to start to challenge your core stability, which is why most people plank, but also if you want to start challenging your shoulder stability, progressing to a one-handed plank is a really good idea. When we did the I think it was the 10 rep challenge that we did on Instagram for a while during the first lockdown. One of the first ones was a 10-second one arm, one leg plank that I did. That was much more for a core stability challenge. If you're trying to challenge your shoulder stability, you only need to go one-handed. You don't have to go one leg as well. If you're feeling tough, you can do. But it's the same idea of I'm trying to stop my shoulder shrugging, and I want to try and hold that plank position. I can go quite wide with my feet, but I'm trying to work on my shoulder stability here. Similar idea, because I'm just trying to load from different sort of straight arm positions, is you can start to kind of add in different movements where I'm reaching through and looking up. And you'll often see people doing this for kind of like thoracic mobility reasons, but this is a great way to build up your shoulder stability. The last one I just want to throw in, because I'm rambling a little bit now, and you can ask any questions and I'll keep rambling about those. A lot of people ask me about the exercise, the Turkish get-up. So I know there's at least one person watching this Zoom who will know what I'm talking about. The Turkish get-up is a great exercise if you're into kettlebell sport or if you're just into lifting. There's loads and loads of reasons to do it, but one of the most important reasons, and sometimes while I'll often do them kind of unweighted before a class, is because it puts you in an extended period of having to support your way through one arm. So if you don't know what a Turkish get-up is, it's just getting up off the floor, so from flat on your back, holding one kettlebell in one arm. I'm just going to do it without kettlebell, and just getting all the way up to a standing position. Once you kind of leave the floor, you come up into a lunge position, and we don't need to worry about the rest of that because we're just kind of focusing on our shoulder stability right now. But a Turkish get-up, if I had a weight in one hand, would basically follow through rolling up onto my elbow, coming up onto my hand, doing a high bridge, and coming through into a kneeling position like this. Okay? Then the rest of the exercise is to stand all the way up, and then you come all the way back down to the floor. That's one rep. But obviously it carries over really heavily to grappling because you spend a lot of time getting up onto your elbows and things like that. So like I mentioned earlier with that elbow push escape, it can be really hard to do that against someone a lot heavier than you. But if you're just not spending a lot of time there, it can be really hard to do it against someone that's even smaller than you. So spending a little bit of time getting used to being on one elbow and keeping, again, that shoulder away from the ear. I'm not letting this happen. I'm keeping the shoulder away from the ear and then coming up onto the hand. Again, shoulder stays away from the ear. And then loading my body onto that arm while I go through a range of motion and then reversing it all the way back to the floor is a really good way to work on that shoulder stability. So all shoulder stability is just working through ranges of motion while there's load running through my hand. That's all it is. And if you think about it, anytime you throw a punch, anytime you base in grappling to not get swept, anytime you get up off your back in grappling, you will almost certainly put weight through one arm. And if you don't have good shoulder stability, that's where a lot of injuries can occur. So that's what we're trying to avoid. Okay? So I started to ramble a little bit towards the end there, guys. So real quick recap. We had muscular imbalance, so our external rotators compared to our internal rotators, and our scapular retraction versus our scapular protraction. And we're just trying to kind of even that muscular imbalance up. The easiest way to do that is to get lots of time under tension for the muscles that are being underused. Okay, so time under tension is just the time you spend in a contracted position. So we had the floor slide. Which again could be done against a wall if you wanted to buy slightly different muscle groups. But on the floor is great, and that's why you see me doing it for almost every single training session. We had our controlled articular rotation, so our Karls, that back of the head to lower back position. Going all the way through that rotation, and all the way through that external rotation on the way back. And then we had a few different options for shoulder stability. So the most basic one was that bear crawl down the dog position. We had that single armed as well. And then we had a few where I just kind of rambled and I lost track a little bit, but they're all just different ideas of putting weight through a shoulder and moving it through a range of motion. Okay, so these are all ways that you can just start to build a little bit of shoulder stability, build a little bit of resilience in your shoulders, particularly if you're kind of up in your training. So for the guys that are going to be coming back and doing a lot of striking, or for the grapplers that are coming back and planning on training hard, competing, it's these little things that will kind of help offset the injuries long term, rather than waiting until the injury happens and then coming over to me and Nathan on the desk and asking us what's the best way to tape up your shoulder. The best thing is you just start doing these exercises now, and we can just keep all our tape. That'd be the best thing. We got any questions, Nathan?
Yeah, okay, so we've got one specific one here about getting back into grappling if suffering from shoulder tendonitis. Okay,
so tendonitis is really specific. If the person that's asking has actually been diagnosed with tendonitis, that would be slightly, you've got tendonitis and tendinosis, and they're just very different in how you would approach fixing them, but they kind of present the same way. But if you're trying to get back into grappling with any kind of injury, the key thing is start really, really slow, start with a very small, manageable amount, and make sure that you're choosing your training partners, which is a little bit difficult at the moment, choosing your training partners wisely, or having a good conversation with the training partners you have, which is going to be more practical at the moment, given how we would be forced to train, about keeping your shoulders safe. So with any kind of injuries, is general injury advice. Don't come back and do lots and lots of rolling before class before you've even done a warm-up. Don't come back and stay on for every single round and do crazy hard stuff straight away as early as possible. And definitely don't just train with someone without telling them about your injury. Don't do that. It's a terrible idea, and it'll make them feel like a really bad person if they accidentally injure you. So you have to communicate with your training partners. Really important. Specifically with shoulders, though, obviously, let the coach know. It's always a really good idea, so that I can avoid putting you, like running a class on Kimuras and you've got two knackered shoulders. It would be a good idea. But when it comes to specific shoulder injuries that are usually chronic, tendonitis is usually a chronic issue. Getting lots and lots of blood flow through the injured tissues on a regular basis is a really, really good idea. When it comes to things like isometrics, or what we were doing there with kind of floor slides and things like that, where a muscle is placed under a lot of time under tension in a very static position, that's actually not great for blood flow. Okay, so blood flow is best when a muscle is going through a concentric and eccentric contractions regularly. So it essentially functions to pump muscle into the blood, which is why it's referred to as the pump. If you're doing isometric contractions, they actually push blood out of the muscle. They make it very hard to get blood in. So it will put the muscle in a hypoxic state, which isn't great when you're trying to get through something like tendonitis. So I would kind of recommend that you get something like a good set of bands and start doing a relatively low resistance but high volume shoulder routine between 2 and 5 times a week. It depends on what stage of injury you're at, depends how bad your shoulders are. Whoever asked that question, either shoot me a message or come and grab me next time you see me in the gym. I'll try and give you a bit of a better answer for that. But generally speaking, with most injuries that are chronic, blood flow is kind of king. Blood flow really helps. So if you can get a lot of blood flowing through that area, that's great. And especially if you can get a lot of working for the muscles that are underused, like we kind of talked about today, that always really helps. So you can just try and restore a bit of balance to the shoulder. One of the things that Nathan was doing, if I remember correctly, after his shoulder injury, was doing quite a high volume of stuff to help his shoulder, but it was really, really specifically selected based around what his injury was. Because I think he had one specific tendon that was torn, and you can't just go
almost all the way through, just hanging on by a thread.
Yeah, so you can't just kind of guess and go, well, I'll just do loads of this and loads of this. Like, specific muscles do specific jobs. So it really helps to know exactly which one you're dealing with, so you can pick your exercises really, really carefully, because you don't want to overuse something that might be half torn or something like that. So you have to be really careful about that. Whoever asked that question, shoot me a message and ask me directly. But just that general advice on coming back from an injury, like me and Nathan have seen it so many times where people, obviously you've missed all your mat time, you really want to get back on. So the first thing you do is jump on, grab your favorite training partner and go roll. I've done the same thing more than once myself, and taken myself off the mats for weeks at a time when I didn't need to. So come back, start slow, start with drills, start with movement drills, leave the sparring out for a little while, make sure your training partners are really trusted, make sure you talk to your training partners about your injuries. A lot of people don't want to do that. They just say, oh, my knee's kind of achy, but don't worry about it. And in reality, they've got like a torn ACL. you should probably communicate better than that with people. If they're going to be allowed to do submissions on you, you should let them know what's going on.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's pretty much what I was thinking, but obviously much more detailed and technical. When he said that, it's like you've got taught a lot of really general stuff today that's going to be great for everybody, but a specific injury might need specific treatment. So we had a question that did mention the Turkish get-ups, and it was saying, would things like the Turkish get-ups or waiter walks be appropriate for building shoulder stability?
Oh, waiter walks, that's a nice one. I'm going to wager that Angus asked that question.
Yeah.
Nailed it. Okay, so Angus has just asked specifically about something called a waiter's walk, which is where you hold a weight in an overhead position and you basically do a loaded carry with it. So it's again, it's a shoulder stability exercise essentially. So yes, 100%, really, really good way to sort of hit a bunch of things all at once. So things like waiter's walks, or for those of you who kind of watch World's Strongest Man or anything like farmer's carries. Farmer's carries is another really popular one, or a suitcase carry, which is just a farmer's carry done on one arm. So just carrying a heavy weight in one arm. The benefit of those is you get grip work, you get shoulder stability work, you get core work, you get a degree of kind of hip and posterior chain work in there. It's a locomotion exercise, which is great because it's technically a single leg exercise. Anything like a waiter's walk or a single arm carry, all really, really good, specifically for shoulder stability, but also just economy of training. As someone that spends a lot of time on the mats, I don't really have the option of doing 6 days a week of lifting where I get to hit each individual muscle group a certain amount of time. Like I don't have time for that. And for most of you that have real jobs and also want to train, you also won't have lots and lots of spare time to do really elaborate training programs. So things like overhead carries, weighted suitcase walks, they're great exercises to try and hit as many areas as possible, specifically when we're talking about shoulder stability. With the Turkish get-up, my hips and back don't tend to like them too much, just a bit too much wear and tear of years on the mat and years striking and things like that. Great exercise. I think they're a little bit overused in terms of kind of top end load, so people try and really overload them. I think there's better ways to hit certain parts of your body that wouldn't involve a Turkish get-up, but I think they're a really, really good warm-up exercise. And I think they're really, really high carryover to grappling. So for me, like you'll often see me doing what's known as a half get-up, which is what I just showed earlier, where I got up onto the elbow, onto the hand, came up into a high position, and then went back to the floor. I often do those warming up before a session because it's so similar to my favorite escape, which is an elbow push escape. So Turkish get-up's pretty good, but I don't think you need to chase them with a really heavy load. Waiter's walks, any kind of walk, really, really underrated set of exercises. Really good way to kind of work a lot of things all at once. Really good training economy. I think we're pretty much out of time now, guys. So thank you all for coming in. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any more specific questions, just shoot me a direct message or message on the groups. I'm going to do a couple more rehab ones, I think, over the next few weeks. So if anyone's got any specific areas they want covering, drop us a message. We'll kind of add them into the list. But thank you all for coming in, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you on the next Zoom, I guess.
Perfect timing, Karl.